Yes, I'm into all the things that it takes to try to get as close to what the composer would want were he alive today.
This is a PBS documentary, James Levine, American Maestro, in which a young Levine being instructed, as you mentioned, by your mentor, George Zell. Here it is.
Every piece of music should start inside the player before he plays the first note. Here's a one-man orchestra, which of course makes things a little less complicated. Out of long experience, I'll tell you, the shorter your downbeat will be, the more precise the attack. Your upbeat can be a little bigger than the downbeat. If you do one, this, about an inch. If your cheeks start to tremble the moment you do this, then it was incisive enough.
You've gotten more handsome with age, Mr. Levine.
Thank you very much. If my cheeks start to tremble, he was something else.
What he meant to you, what he gave to you.
He was a remarkable conductor, particularly of classic repertoire, and he built. He became music director of the Cleveland Orchestra in the middle 40s. And he was also conducting at the Met. He conducted several seasons at the Met. And I think in Cleveland, he had the opportunity to build a European-style, classical European orchestra in America with Americans. And he was... When I was a student, we used to go and hear all the visiting orchestras that came to Carnegie Hall. But one orchestra, my friends and I always had to go to all three of their concerts, was Cleveland, because it was always interpretively penetrating and more marvelously played. And when I finished with Juilliard, I was taken in a competition to go to Baltimore for some weeks to do a repertory project with the Baltimore Symphony with visiting conductors leading us, helping us. There were 4 of us. And Zell came to the audition, and he liked what he saw well enough to tell me he had a position open on the conducting staff in Cleveland, and he would love to audition me thoroughly and take me for it if it worked the way he thought it would. And for me, this was exactly what I needed, as I say, always the right thing at the right moment. It was just what I didn't know anything about. I didn't know how to deal with a single symphony orchestra as an entity. The way I really did more know about operatic structure. And I went there, and I was with him from 1964 till he died in 1971. And I think it was 1971. It may have been 1970. I lose it now. But I think during that time, I observed him. I asked him many questions. We spent many sessions together going over music that was related to music that he was doing, but not always the same music. And he recommended me for some of the first professional work that I got. In fact, I date my professional conducting to 50 years next year in 2014, because it was 1964 when I started in Cleveland.
Was there a moment that you knew you wanted to conduct?
Oh, yes, there was. It was in 1956, I spent a summer at the Marlborough Festival. And my general music teacher, not piano teacher, but music theory repertoire style, Walter Levine, who was the first violinist of the LaSalle String Quartet, he called Mr. Serkin and asked him if he would take me, and Serkin was only skeptical because I was 13, but he took me. And in Marlborough, there was not yet the concert hall there is now. We used to have concerts in the hall that was the dining hall, and when it converted into a concert hall after lunch. And I learned so much there about ensemble and making music with other people, that from then on, the idea of just developing as a solo pianist went away from me. And I had to make music with other people, all kinds, chamber pieces, songs. And little by little, I got the bug about doing symphonic and oratorio and operatic repertoire. There was only one person there who was a coach conductor to assist on Così fan tutte, believe it or not. Yes. That was the opera they were doing that summer. And they asked me if I would put the pianists together and make a backstage chorus. And I did. There wasn't anybody else there to do it. And I got bitten by the opera conducting bug then.
Wow. And what a lifetime it's given you.
Hasn't it?
Yeah. Falstaff this year, this is how would you describe what you're going to do this year?
Well, we're going to do a new production,
that's what I mean.
Which we haven't done in many, many years.
50 years, I read.
That's right. Yeah. And I've done a good number of the revivals of that production that was the only one in my time.
Yeah. You have described it as the creme de la creme.
Yes.
Why is that? What is it about it?
Well, let's put it this way. If you take all of the great operatic comedies, the really great ones, if you take Figaro and Gianni Schicchi and Rosenkavalier and The Bartered Bride and Don Pasquale and Elisir and I'm sure I'm leaving something, Meistersinger, and you take all the human comedies, with or above the best of them is Falstaff. Falstaff is just a miracle of libretto, of storyline, of musical inspiration, of mastery of every detail of composition. It's in a class with Figaro and Meistersinger, which are perhaps the other two that are most perfect. I don't need them to be perfect. I love a lot of pieces that aren't perfect, but those are just the creme de la creme of operatic comedy, which is striking because 80% of operatic repertoire is grandiose, tragic, melodramatic, somebody dies. In these pieces, the human beings get wiser and through a lot of circumstances which they play seriously, but we find very funny.
Who else has been instrumental in terms of helping you appreciate, A, the music, and B, being instructive to you, mentored to you, or in opening vistas to you? Who are the men and women who have been there that have helped you understand all the limitless potential of music?
Boy, it's a long list, Charlie, and it's a long list of official teachers like George Zell, who was my mentor there, Wolfgang Vacano, who broke open the idea of having an assistant in the opera workshop in Aspen and had me conduct the last performance of whatever opera we were doing, starting in 1962. I did that when I was 19. And I had, from the time I was 10 or 11, I had Walter Levine, the first violinist of the LaSalle Quartet, for all the musical, for everything, for theory, for harmony, for repertoire, for style. He even coached me on the instrument, playing chamber music with his students. It was an unbelievable education, starting, of the kind that one goes to college for, but I was 11 when I started it. And then I went, for example, to Marlborough, and there was Rudolf Serkin, and there was Claude Frank, and there was a whole community of brilliant teaching musicians. And then I went to Aspen to study with Rosina Levine because she was the most dynamic teacher of the instrument at the time, and she was very well known for working on technique, but she took me knowing full well that I was trying to use the piano as a tool for conducting mostly, and I didn't know how much I wanted to perform on the piano. Turned out I did want to and did do quite a lot more than I pictured when I started, but she was very willing to start with me when I was 14, the year after I was with Serkin. And in Aspen, every year were, well, first of all, Darius Milhaud, the great Milhaud, who was the head of the composition faculty. He brought contemporary composers with him every summer, so one had a chance to talk with them and hear their music and work on their music. just for example, I conducted Albert Herring in front of its composer, Benjamin Britten, while I was there. I think of that now because we're doing a beautiful revival of Midsummer Night's Dream at the Met at the moment, and it's Britten's 100th year. I mean, would if he was still alive. Yeah. But I think one after the other, it perhaps can be seen better if I say, whenever I conduct a French piece or play a French piece, behind me are Jean Morel, my teacher at Juilliard, a very French and brilliant conductor. Jenny Tourelle, who I studied with and played concerts with for years. Régine Crespin, likewise. Pierre Boulez, who was, when I was starting as assistant in Cleveland, he started conducting in Cleveland, and he worked with me on a lot of his music and Second Viennese school music that I needed to learn. And Manuel Rosenthal came to the Met and conducted our French triple bill, and he was literally connected. I mean, he was a Ravel protege. The point is, all of this flow through, which I always tried very hard to get because I just felt we were getting further and further away from the composers and when the pieces were written, and I didn't want that to happen to me.
Yeah. When you stand there or sit there, you sit or stand on the shoulders of giants.
That's absolutely right.
You know, who've helped you understand the music. So
this is what makes it so critical to me to try to help the next people.
So you can give them everything that's been given to you.
Absolutely, as much as possible.
Do you see extraordinary talent out there?
Oh, yes, without any doubt. I see, individually, I see plenty of talent. The phases change and the priorities change, and there are institutional and structural crises, but the talent keeps coming, thank God.
Do you worry about orchestra, and do you worry about opera, and do you worry about its future?
But my worry is what can I say? We've always worried.
Yeah.
So,
but are the times more challenging today? On the one hand, you have...
Absolutely they are.
They are. And
they are.
Why is that?
Oh, Lordy. Why is that? Good question, Charlie. It depends on which part of it we're going to examine. But perhaps the easiest way to start examining it is to say, imagine that you were a singer or a conductor or an instrumentalist who was 30 or 40 or 20 or 50 years old when the premiere of the last Verdi operas came, right? Yeah. And Verdi died in 1901. Now, there were people who heard him, people who studied with him, people who studied with the generation of the people who signed the premieres, and little by little, there were 2 world wars. Yeah. There was the jet plane flying people around where their brains could go, but their bodies couldn't go that fast, and there was some problem with that. And gradually the teachers thinned out, and so it wasn't, I mean, it was bound generationally to become diffused. And at the moment, if you go to the opera, the best performances you hear are likely to be of relatively contemporary operas or newish operas, and of relatively old ones, Baroque ones, Mozart, that sort of thing. That's because the old ones have gotten old enough that we can reinvent the way we do them without it worrying people, and the new ones because we're close enough to the substance of them. Sure. But that large output of 19th century that kept the big opera houses hot when I was growing up and before, we can't do anything like that density of that repertoire nowadays, just because of the quantity of the kind of singer it needs. They come along, but they don't have the same. It's one thing to come along and be able to hear it on the radio and in your opera house left and right of you. It's another thing when there's only 1 or 2 others of that quality spread around the whole world. And it's hard for them to last as long because of the burden. Some of them do remarkably with all that responsibility, but it's there are times we worry about that.
I assume you would do it exactly the way you did it.
Well, I don't suppose I would be able to change it much, but I would do it. Let's just say, if I had it to do over again, I might change a detail that I know now more about than I did then. But the basic guts of it, I wouldn't change at all. I think we did as good a job and had as good judgment as it was possible to have.
Yeah. But I mean, would you have composed more? Would you have nothing? None of that kind of thing.
I didn't have that. I wasn't a talented composer. I was a dutiful composer because I wanted to learn about it. Yeah. But I was a recreative musician, not a creative one. And fortunately, I mean, I never got confused about that. What I go around trying to do is make sure that conductors don't get delusions of grandeur about who wrote the piece.
If I look at you and I look at so many of the, and we know many of the names of the great conductors, whether symphony or orchestra, symphony or opera or other things, would there be a common link among the great ones?
The great ones are functioning in a certain realm. They are functioning with great understanding of the way the music is put together. They're functioning with a high energy and a high desire to communicate what they find in these masterpieces to an audience of listeners. They are perceptive and skillful on various levels in communicating with an orchestra and getting the orchestra, who after all are playing the instruments, the conductor is just waving his stick, to get them to be as committed as they can and as they would be on their own, and get all this communicated to the public. This, all great conductors have in common, I think. Then the many other things are a matter of degree. So there's a violence, an excitement, a togetherness, a focus that is absolutely not beaten in any other piece written before or after. And burn the E flat as best you can. And one, da, hold it, burn it, yes. Rip off, one, da, yes. Rip off, love it. Don't be late starting. Harder, harder, da, burn it out, rip it off.
When it's a perfect storm for a piece and your orchestra and you, does it somehow go up and do you feel like, I realize I'm in a zone, I realize something is happening this evening? It's a very good question. I tell you what happens. Music is not an art form that deals really with the concept of perfection. You have hundreds of people in an opera performance singing and playing for hours, and somebody's lip slips or somebody's fingers, an accident happens. That's not of any consequence. But you can feel it unmistakably if you have a large group, or small if the piece is small, group of highly talented and really dedicated artists who've really worked on the piece and who understand the technique of rehearsing and then releasing. You can feel in that zone more frequently than I ever thought possible. It doesn't mean you think the performance can't be made better. It's just that you know you're in the realm where the composer would say, good job, that's my piece. You just explained to me something I didn't understand about music. What could happen? What could go wrong? I understand sports more than I understand music. And I can understand how you might throw the ball a little bit further than you wanted to, and therefore it's an interception rather than a completed pass. I understand, the golf in which your hands don't come down just right. But it's the same thing in part with music.
I'll tell you something that always strikes me. When I come to the end of a Met season, for the last 3 weeks or so, I can feel the audience is applauding not just for the performance they're at, but they're saying, thanks for all the high points in this terrific season.
Yeah.
They're saying your batting average was high.
Yeah.
It's that for a music director and for a conductor who, I mean, I had to be so exposed in this city in order to have to make use of the situation we had to keep making our results better. And the public understood this continuously, and the interaction with them is so beautiful. And I think I don't think it's not possible in art for everybody to like everything, but it is possible for them to understand what it takes to do it, and that if it was so easy, any idiot could do it lying down.
Right. You expect a level of high performance.
You know, Charlie, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's another example that comes up to me all the time. What do you look for in a singer? People say to me.
Yeah.
I say, I look for the best in that singer, that individual singer. But when singers audition, I beg them, if they're going to audition, come out on stage, do your thing, and don't spend a moment on whether or not you get this job or not. You have no idea what the people who are listening are looking for. You have no idea what their criteria are and what their conception of the part may be. And you may sing marvelously, and they give the part to somebody who's a different element or a different, who knows. Or you may have a not particularly good day and be exactly what they were looking for. And this is, you can't get out there and audition for human being every time you have to audition for a job.
You can't guess their expectations.
No, but that just is an example of what you're saying, that there's a kind of ultimate of what one wants to hear is a singer clearly functioning with what they've got. And what you don't want is somebody trying to make up for something that isn't there. I always beg young singers not to audition too soon, not to audition when they may have something that within a year or two could be so easily remedied, and then when they audition, no one would be able to tell what they'd had forever and what they had only learned in the last 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, you understand this more than almost anybody. I mean, give us a sense of what you've learned about singing and what you've learned about singers.
Lordy, you as good corkers, that is always like walking on shifting ground, because it's a science only to a certain point, and then it's an art. But at least we do know enough about it to be able to use people who do it well as models and demonstrators for people who need to learn to do it well. And there are still some really good coaches and teachers, not perhaps as numerous as there were at one time, but they come along because the kind of singer who's in demand also changes with the time. Now, for example, well, just consider, when I was a kid, it literally didn't matter at all whether a singer looked plausible in a role at all if that singer could sing the spots of it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that an audience today has that same conditioning. I think an audience, I remember a great letter that came. We used to do full-length performances of operas for students, for kids. And now we do it differently. We do specially formatted things. But 100 years ago, when I was just starting, we did a performance of Aida for young kids. And their teacher had them write letters to me after it. And one kid wrote, he thought that, considering that the girl who sang the title role of Aida didn't really look so beautiful, it would have been good if she'd sung more beautifully.
Yeah.
And I thought, out of the mouths of babes. You see, that's the thing. It's the combination. If somebody comes on stage and doesn't look like your glamorous idea of Aida, but when she opens her mouth, oh, wow, she can phrase and sing and soar. You don't know what she looks like anymore.
And exactly. You see what you imagine Aida to look like.
Absolutely.
In your eyes, because you hear the voice, which so...
And opera drama, don't forget, no matter what, is never going to be repertory theater drama because it's sung and it goes across the pit and the emotions are a certain size. And operatic acting is somewhat different from ensemble theater acting, but you sure do know it when you've got it.
Should a city like New York have more than one opera company?
Does what?
Should a city like New York have more than one opera company?
Absolutely.
Sad, isn't it?
Oh, terrible. The saddest. Desperate.
Yeah. It really is a tragedy that you don't...
And I mean, a company that people who were still alive, Julius Rudel, put, you know, his lifeblood in that company for all that time, and he outlives it. I mean, that's unthinkable, insane.
When you look at Peter Gelb and you, I mean, is there in some way, can you argue that this is a perfect match because of differences? They complement each other. Here you and here Peter. What do you say about, you know, the director of an opera house and the driving force musically of an opera house? What need be between them to create great art?
Charlie, all I can say to you is, with Peter, when it works, it really works. And, I mean, between us.
Yes.
And we're on a track now that I think it continues. And I mean, it was so important. I mean, what Peter thought of this is crystal clear. If he had been a different kind of general manager, a different kind of man, he would have said, well, we don't know when Jim will be back or if he'll be back. I have to move on.
Yeah, exactly.
But he found a way to keep the company protected enough and to keep the option open that if I came back, let alone came back in really good form, that I could continue. And I can assure you, day after day, that wasn't so easy to do, and the company had to absorb a lot of shock, and he had to. But I can only say, if we're dealing with a man made of that, who then, when I come back, and he's just delighted that it is more than he ever thought it could possibly be after an injury like that. And we're getting along marvelously. I think, and I worked with an awful lot of general managers, all different styles at different times. And opera always has difficulties of various seriousness, but I think Peter is so determined to solve the crises that occur in his time, and he's so intelligent about it that and God knows, for the Metropolitan Opera, I will always give anything I can. That's just where I made a life commitment, and you don't do that because of something external. It just is. It's like, I guess it's like marriage.
And in the end, your legacy there will be, you think?
What do I think it'll be?
Yeah.
Well, it's very hard to think of performances in terms of legacy, because performances are evanescent. But I guess if one wants to look over the period I've been there up to now, we brought a lot of operas into the repertoire that are great operas that hadn't been there before. We launched and worked successfully a young artist development program, which now has people holding up their art form all around the world, and we nurtured a lot of our own artists, as well as continuing always to try to bring the best from other places, and we brought the quality of our night-to-night performance at its best up to a higher level. And I think we have initiatives now which will perhaps yield us more new works, but if you ask me, do I think we do enough new works? No, I don't. But I don't agree with the people who measure what we do by that, because Gadi Casazza was there for years, and he did new operas one after the other, American operas. He was determined, and he did them, and they were gone. And it's very important to me that this business of working new pieces doesn't become like hit and run. Like, I feel very uncomfortable when I spend a lot of time studying, rehearsing a piece, and I really see what it has, and then it's gone. And, for example, at our concert on Sunday, we played Elliott Carter's Variations, written 1954-55, and Elliott just passed away a year ago. And I've played that piece with our orchestra, the Met Orchestra, I mean an orchestra that plays opera all the time. We've played that 3 times in our concert series, which means that anyone who doesn't want to hear it doesn't have to go. But people who do want to hear it can count on there being a way to hear it again. And that's desperately important to me. I'm not very interested in the quantity. I'm interested in the quality and the memory and the depth of the experience.
That's the most interesting answer I've ever heard to that question. I mean, sometimes people will say everything he did was great, but did he do enough of this? And
absolutely.
That criticism. That's the response to.
It is.
Yeah.
And I was once told the Met should do a new opera every year, and my response was, I wish I really thought there was a new opera good enough for the Met every year. And that makes it sound as though I'm putting the composers down. I'm not. It's not that at all. It's that for something to succeed at the Met, it has to be studied. It has to be rehearsed. It has to be cast. It has to be digested. It can't just be crammed like people do for an exam and then they don't remember anything about it again. That syndrome is really bad, I think. I don't think that's helping any. Whereas, if you look over the last years, what we've done that hadn't been played at the Met before, you'll see some brand new works and you'll see some recent works, but you'll also see arguably Rossini's greatest comedy, Cenerentola, which had never been played before, the 2 opera seria of Mozart, which we now play and play. We now have the 7 great Mozart operas, and years ago there were only 3. A lot of Verdi that wasn't there before. There was no Handel at all. 1984 was the first Handel opera in the Met. The 83-4 season. And there's Janacek, and there's Britten, and there's Stravinsky, and there have been new works by a lot of composers, which I hope in some cases will stick around and be revived.
The question of legacy, one who knows little about music but understands a few things, it seems to me the legacy is, as people say, first do no harm. You come to a place,
right,
and you do no harm.
Right.
And second is you leave it better than you found it.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's the idea, as I talk to corporate people that have done something, as Steve Jobs say,
right,
it's not an individual product.
No.
It is a culture, it is a company, it is a place where they were, in a sense, being true to the idea,
And I think it's just what you're saying, that it has to do with all of the things we did that raises our night-to-night standard, and the variety of our repertoire, and the opportunities for operatic artists across the board. And I often say to people, if you give me a list of works you would like to have seen us do in the last 40 years, you will remember for each one you give me, you'll have to strike off one that we did.
So many people are happy to see you back, including me.
I can feel that. It makes it possible to do it.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Charlie. A pleasure.
James Levine for the Hour. Thank you for joining us. See you next time. For more about this program and early episodes, visit us online at pbs.org and charlierose.com.